So in this lecture, we're going to help you understand the psychology behind habits. And of course, as everybody knows, a habit is a routine or a behavior that is repeated on a regular basis, and eventually it becomes subconscious. You do it without even thinking about it. So an action or a behavior is considered a habit as soon as it gets into autopilot mode. That means your mind is doing the habit without you even having to think about it. And according to Wikipedia, the American Journal of Psychology, 1903, defines a habit from the standpoint of psychology, a more or less fixed way of thinking, willing or feeling acquired through previous repetition of a mental experience. So it is initially a mental experience that is enhanced through repetition in order for it to eventually become a habit. And of course, you can think about tons of habits you have. Some people have a habit of smoking. Even walking itself is a habit. You see people walking in different ways because it's a habit. They got used to walking in a certain way, and that's how they got accustomed to it. People who've been going to the gym for 10 years straight made a habit out of it, and now it's kind of natural. They don't feel good if they don't go to the gym because it's part of their daily habits. It's part of themselves, and it's unconscious. So they're not even aware of the fact that they're not thinking about it anymore, but they're just doing it. They're executing because it's a habit. So now habit formation is the process by which a behavior through regular repetition becomes automatic, as we said. And when the behavior is repeated on a consistent basis, there is an incremental increase in the chain that links the context and the action. So forming the habit, you get to a point where you can do something effortlessly. In the same time, you do it in such a perfect way, such as driving. When somebody's driving today, you don't think about how you're driving, you just do it. It's automatic, it becomes a habit, and therefore you can listen to the radio, you can listen to an audiobook. It's not recommended, of course. You might get distracted, but a lot of people do it. The reason why is because driving became a habit that they don't even have to think about it. It's just automatic. Their mind and their body, their entire system is used to it. Now, the big question is, what is the psychology behind habits? We do understand that repetition makes out of a behavior, a repetitive behavior, a habit. But what is the psychology behind it? How does it work? Every habit starts with a psychological pattern called a habit loop. This habit loop is responsible for the auto-generation of habits through repetitive behavior. Now, of course, there are different types of habits that we're going to talk about in later lectures, but each and every habit that a person has, in order for it to become automatic, it has to go through the habit loop. Psychologically speaking, the only way for a behavior to turn into a habit is through this habit loop. Now, there are three main key points in this habit loop. There's the trigger, the routine, and then there's the reward. First, there's the cue or trigger, as we said, that tells your brain to go into automatic mode and let a behavior unfold. So this trigger would alert your brain to let a learned behavior unfold. This is exactly where your behavior that would eventually become a habit would start. And of course, every person and every habit can have a different trigger. Maybe after you finish meetings, you have this habit of smoking. Maybe after you have a big meal, this is a trigger for you to smoke. These are all triggers that would eventually unfold a certain habit. And even though it's very obvious that there is something that is creating this habit, something that is starting this habit every single time, but people are not aware of it. They're not aware that there is a cue or a trigger that is starting this behavior, that is starting this habit, that is bit by bit unfolding to become automatic. Now, after the trigger or the cue, there's the routine or the habit itself. The routine, which is the behavior itself, whatever you're trying to avoid or whatever you're trying to implement, this automatic behavior that's turning bit by bit into a habit, this is where it starts. So first there's the cue that would actually start the behavior, it would make it unfold. And then there's the process, there's the routine, there's the habit. So in the previous example, when we said a trigger or a cue might be you finishing a meeting, then the habit might be you smoking. So the routine or the behavior would be you taking out the cigarette, lighting it, and smoking it based on the cue, which is you, or the trigger, which is you finishing the meeting. And finally, of course, the third step is the reward. Something that your brain likes that helps it remember this habit loop in the future. And this is the third step, is the part where the habit becomes actually automatic, because you can become dependent of it. If it gives you certain pleasure, if it releases certain hormones in your body, smoking and nicotine, you can become dependent. This is where the habit can turn from an actual automatic habit to an addiction that you can never stop. And that, of course, reflects to the previous example when we said there was the cue or the trigger, which is you finishing the meeting at work. Then the routine or behavior, which is you taking out the cigarette and smoking it. And third is, maybe first, is the rush that you got from the nicotine, which is your reward, or just the act itself. Some people enjoy the act of taking out the cigarette, lighting it, and smoking it. It's an entire process that happens, right? Studies found that it's not just the nicotine itself that enhances this addiction towards smoking cigarettes, but it's the actual habit of taking it out, lighting it, and smoking it, puffing out the smoke. The entire routine becomes an addiction because it's not just the reward, it's not just the nicotine that is taking place, it's the entire loop, it's the entire system, it's the cue and the trigger, it's the routine, and it's the reward. So in short, you have something that would start this habit. You have a cue or trigger that would make this habit start at this particular time. And then there's the routine, the habit that unfolded afterwards. And then after that, there's the reward, what you got out of it, what you got out of the habit or out of the behavior. Now, once the loop is established through repetition over and over again, consistency of this loop, of the trigger, of the routine, and of the reward, you liking it, enjoying it, different factors can get in place, which we're going to talk about later. But then the brain can almost completely shut down. Studies showed that in certain habits, the brain is not focusing at all on this habit. Zero. It's completely shut down, which is the case when you're walking. Most people, they never think about their way they're walking. You're breathing. Breathing eventually is, of course, something natural that happens in the body, but there are different types of people breathe differently, and it's all because of habits. And habits eventually become unconscious, and once that happens, people are not just unaware that they are engaging in a habit that is detrimental for their lifestyle, but also people become unaware of the cues, the triggers, the routine itself. They become unaware of it in big. They don't know the big picture of it. They don't understand the loop, because of course a lot of people don't even know that there is a loop. And once it becomes unconscious, it becomes so natural that you don't feel there's anything wrong you're doing. Our basal ganglia, which is a part in the brain and in the front of the brain, right next to the prefrontal cortex, would take a behavior and turn it into an automatic routine through repetition. So once there's the cue, trigger, and then there's the routine, and then there's the reward, and then you add repetition, then your basal ganglia would take this behavior and turn it into an actual routine that is unconscious, and your mind would be completely shut down at one point when you're engaging in this habit. But of course, it's not that easy to form a habit through repetition. The process of forming this habit can be really, really slow. The average time for participants in a certain study to reach the asymptote of automatically developing this habit was about 66 days. And of course, the range is different. Some people say it's 21 days to build a habit. Some people say it's between 18 and 250 days, but it's not a short period of time. So doing it for 2 weeks is not enough to establish a habit. And it's not just about the person, it's also about the habit itself. How much effort does it take? How much concentration? How much energy? And do you actually enjoy it or do you hate it? Does it consume your willpower or does it need some motivation? All of these are factors that can influence the formation of the habit and the process of it turning from an actual behavior to a habit that is automatic, where your mind is shut down and it's just unconscious. Now, not all habits have this same loop. There are some habits called keystone habits. And these habits would usually influence the formation of other habits. So people who go to the gym on a regular basis have this tendency to eat better and healthier food. Why? The habit of going to the gym and working out on a daily basis became a keystone habit to other habits, such as eating well, having a good diet, or drinking a lot of water. So there isn't an actual a trigger or routine or reward. It's just, it became part of it because it became complementary because of the keystone habit, which is you going to the gym on a daily basis. Admiral William McRaven made a speech. Maybe you've seen it before. It's an inspiring speech about how making your bed every morning can change your life. Making your bed every morning, when this becomes a habit, this can become a keystone habit to further actions that can unfold, that can have a huge positive impact on your daily lifestyle. McRaven says that using this method of making your bed every morning as a keystone habit, when you finish it, you finish the first task of the day, it will give you a small sense of pride, which will eventually encourage you to do another task, and then another, and then another, and then another, and it just unfolds a series of tasks that you had, that you just did, you accomplished them, you executed, and you finished them just because you had a good start, which is you making your bed in the morning. And in that case, the entire habit loop changes. These habits, as we said, they don't have a particular loop to themselves. However, the initial habit of you making the bed, this keystone habit becomes the trigger of a much bigger habit loop that involves all several different habits that you did throughout the day. And the routine, of course, is these habits themselves, the behaviors that you had throughout the day, that you did, the things that you did and things that you didn't. These are all habits that get inside the routine process in the bigger habit loop that is formed through the keystone habit. And then eventually the reward is much bigger because it involves the reward from each and every single thing that you accomplished. You will get not just the satisfaction of reward, but the satisfaction of fulfillment because you did something exceptionally good. And you can notice how important these keystone habits are from several examples. Sometimes when somebody works out on a regular basis and then this keystone habits makes the person eat healthy and drink a lot of water and sleep well. Let's say the person stops going to the gym, stops working out. Guess what? Most likely his diet will not stay the same. His sleep habits will not stay the same. He will not drink as much water. And the reason why is not because he just doesn't want to. It's because the keystone habit, which is working out, which became a trigger for all of these different actions, disappeared. And with this trigger gone, there's nothing to start this chain of actions that would make you eat well, drink a lot of water, sleep well, right? And keystone habits, most people look at keystone habits as they're always something positive. But the truth of the matter is, keystone habits can also be detrimental. There are a lot of keystone habits that are bad. So people who have this habit of drinking, for example, based on a cue, which is stress. So whenever somebody feels stressed, they start drinking alcohol, and this becomes a keystone habit. Then there are a lot of things that will unfold based on this keystone habit. You might start having fights with your colleagues or your wife or your children, or you might start doing some behavior that would push people away from you. You might eat a lot of junk food. You might stop doing something that you've been doing for a while. And all of these happen, and they keep on happening because of the bad keystone habit that is initially implemented in your system, which is drinking every time you feel a little bit of stress. So when we're going to talk about how to actually get over habits or create new habits, you will find that keystone habits have a major impact, much more than just basic habits that have one cue, one routine, and one reward. But we will talk about this later. Now, what you also need to know that on top of the habit loop, there are other factors that have a huge impact when it comes to the habits and behaviors becoming automatic. First thing is the reason behind the habit. Sometimes habit don't always start because of a cue or trigger, reward, or routine. Sometimes there's an initial reason. When you started smoking, for example, maybe you were at a party and you had a friend who gave you a cigarette. You tried it, you didn't feel anything, you were pretty drunk, let's say, and then you tried it again. Somebody else offered you a cigarette, and then you started liking it during the party. Now, the reason why you started is because somebody offered you a cigarette. Otherwise, you wouldn't have bought a pack yourself, go home and smoke a cigarette. But the fact that somebody offered is the reason why you actually started this habit. Now, once you started smoking at home, for example, then there is a habit loop that became established, and that's where the habit became automatic. Before, when somebody offered you a cigarette and you liked it, afterwards there was a craving. So you need to know also, what are you actually craving? Most people are not aware of what they're craving out of the habit. So when they get addicted to smoking, they think that their body is just craving nicotine, when in fact, maybe the initial craving is smoking the cigarette with somebody else and socializing with people. A lot of people use cigarettes and smoking as a way to socialize with people, and this can eventually become a craving. Whenever you want to socialize with people, you have a craving of smoking while doing it. Because of the habit loop, eventually it becomes a reward. The entire thing is a reward. The reward can become the craving, and the craving can become the reward. And at the same time, the two can be two different things. Because in the example of smoking, you're not just craving social interaction that you do through the habit of smoking, but your body is also craving nicotine. And then lastly, there is the goal. What are you trying to accomplish out of it? So getting back to our example, maybe the goal is to meet more people through social interaction, to make more connections, make more friends, meet a girl. The habits of walking and driving, they become automatic. But of course, once they become automatic, the goal becomes, you become unconscious of the goal. But the initial goal is to move and go places, move around, go to the city or go to your parents' place or walk to the gym. Whatever the goal is, it developed the habit of you driving automatically and you walking automatically. Same thing goes for the example that we talked about, which is smoking. The goal can be to meet new people, or whatever the goal is, it created a craving. And then there's the reason why the habit actually began. And then there is the habit loop. Now, at this point, I'm pretty sure that there was a lot of information and it's getting kind of confusing and hard to process it. But I'm going to explain each and every one of these concepts in details in the next lecture.